Greetings ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to another World of Tanks video, but in this one we're going back to doing something I used to do a bit more often a little while back. Essentially we're going to bring some rumours, news related to the game into one video to try and make people aware of what is potentially on the horizon. Some of you may well already know some or all of what I'm going to say, and some of you may not. I'm not going to be talking about every single rumour and changes that are upcoming. I'm just going to be looking at some of what I think are the more interesting ones. And in this particular video, we're mainly talking about the Brits. But before we get onto that, let's quickly just have a mention of the French. Apparently there is, well, for some time it has been rumoured that there is going to be a second French heavy tank line, and that this line would be more conventional heavy tanks, more focus on armour, probably not auto-loading guns, less focus on mobility, etc. And it looks like, well, we might have started seeing some of these. So this, for example, don't know what it's called, but this looks to be essentially an AMX M4 hull, maybe, or something similar, with a different turret shoved on top. The idea, from what I've heard, is that this might be a Tier 9 French heavy tank. Not sure. Possibly at Tier 10 you might have a similar sort of setup, but mounted on the AMX 50B chassis, which is actually a well-armoured chassis. It's the turret of the 50B that lets it down, or well-armoured frontally. And this images of this tank this tank has also been seen in some official wargaming related or wargaming video material. So it does look like this is a machine that is definitely on the cards at some point. Doesn't have a name yet though, so I thought I'd just mention that. With the French out the way, let's talk Brits. There's a reason I'm talking about the Brits. Let's just leave that up there as a bit of a teaser for you, a bit of a spoiler. So, wargaming, and please bear in mind that throughout what I'm going to say, the principle that wargaming have said they are running with for the purposes of rebalancing different machines from different tech trees is that they want the higher tier machines to have a similar style of gameplay. So predominantly they want the tiers 8, 9 and 10 tanks to just be a natural progression from one to the other, rather than having jarring gameplay change styles in that particular those higher tiers. And I can understand that, and I don't necessarily think that's a terrible idea. And they've already started that. So for example, when you saw the Soviet medium tanks change, things like the T-54 and the T-44, there was a much greater emphasis on armour, and they fiddled around with the guns in some cases. And it looks like we're going to see similar things with the British tech tree. So there are changes to 3 of the British tech tree lines that I want to talk about. Let's start off with the heavy tanks. Now, the top tier British heavy tanks, wargaming want to change. I'm going to come back to the tier 10 in just a moment. There's just a little spoiler for you. So let's come back to the tier 10 in a minute. I haven't got the information up, that's fine. Essentially what they're doing is starting off with the Carnarvon at tier 8. They are increasing the frontal armour of the tank. They are giving it back the top Centurion turret. And they're doing that because the Centurion turrets are getting an armour buff. The problem was that when they gave the Centurions their HD models, the turrets took a slap in the face and became kind of cheesy. And then that kind of played against how you wanted them to play. So instead, the Centurions are getting a turret armor buff, and incidentally, so is the that includes the Centurion Action X at tier 10. But anyway, so they're giving the Carnarvon back the upgraded Centurion turret as its top turret, and they're buffing the armor on it. They're giving it a 32-pounder gun with hilarious DPM. Last I heard, 280 alpha damage and a rate of fire of 10 rounds per minute. 2,800 DPM on a tier 8 heavy tank. Holy mother of God. Those of you who are familiar with the 32-pounder gun may infer from that they also possibly are changing the 32-pounder gun, because this version has 280 alpha. The version we have in the game at the moment is 250. Will those changes affect the Conqueror gun carriage? Sorry, the Churchill gun carriage? I don't know. But anyway, So the Carnarvon receiving upgraded frontal armor, a much better gun, but there is a trade-off. It looks like the dispersion values from that gun are going to be worse, so it won't aim quite as quickly as it does at the moment. And the mobility of the tank may also take a little bit of a hit in the face, which is a little concerning in as much as the Carnarvon isn't exactly a speed demon to start with. But honestly, overall, it looks like the tank is getting a buff. At tier 9, the Conqueror, they're doing a similar thing. They're buffing the frontal armor of the tank, possibly slightly nerfing the mobility, and nerfing the gun. Now, this one is a bit... honestly, the Conqueror doesn't need any changes in as much as it being a balanced machine. It already is a pretty balanced machine, I think. You certainly don't feel inadequate when playing it, and by the same token, it's not overpowered. You can't just hold down W, roll forward, and expect to win. You do actually have to engage your brain. But, nonetheless, Wargaming are trying to make, as I said, that playstyle more consistent. So they are buffing the frontal armor, slightly nerfing the gun, and possibly slightly nerfing the mobility on the Conqueror. Then we get to tier 10, and that's where things get interesting. The FV215B, the tier 10 British heavy tank, is going to be replaced. It is being Foshified. It will be replaced with the Super Conqueror. Before anyone starts taking the mick out of that, this was actually a design proposal. Essentially, it's a Conqueror with a shed load of spaced armor welded to the front. So this would have a more consistent playstyle. The Super Conqueror would have decent frontal armor. The gun is an upgrade over the gun on the tier 9 Conqueror. Don't worry, I have had a look. Yeah, so it would be a more consistent playstyle. What's happening to the FV215B then is it's being removed from the tech tree and turned into another one of these tier 10 special reward tank things. If you already own the FV215B, it gets replaced with the Super Conqueror, so you receive the Super Conqueror as the regular tier 10 British heavy tank, and you get the FV215B as a special kind of tier 10 reward tank. That is the plan. So any of your stats and whatnot that were on the FV215B will stay on the 215B. Equipment, shells that were on the tank will be sent to the depot. Marks of Excellence and Mastery badges will also remain on the 215B. Any undistributed experience you have on the FV will be transferred to the Super Conqueror, as it will then be the tier 10. Any camouflage patterns, inscriptions and emblems will also be transferred to the Super Conqueror. And this is one that I find slightly confusing. The camouflage patterns, inscriptions and emblems that were rewarded from what? Not sure. I'm not sure if it means ones you received as a reward as opposed to purchasing. Anyway, it says will be sent to the depot to allow you to apply them to another vehicle. The crew will be retrained to the Super Conqueror and sent to the barracks. And that includes dismissed crew members that can now be recovered. Yeah, so those of you who are interested in picking up a quote-unquote free tier 10, you will have until patch 0.9.20.1, so that is the next patch, to grind your way up to tier 10 and have purchased the FV215B. It's another one of those. Speaking personally, I already have the tank, haven't played it yet, but I do actually own it. I took advantage of the Gamescom discounts to buy it, so I'm just going to get a straight up replacement, which will be nice. But I just want to make people aware that this is on the cards. Now, this information isn't final per se, so some of the details may change, but as far as I can work out, the fact that the FV215B is going to be replaced with the Super Conqueror, and that if you own the 215B you will receive both tanks, that I don't think is going to change. So they are the changes to the British heavy tanks. For anyone complaining about the Chieftain, I don't want to make this video about the Chieftain. I don't know for sure what they're doing with the Chieftain. The last news I heard is that they're toying around with putting it at the top of a second British heavy tank line. Whether that would be a full line, a partial line at higher tiers, or what, I do not know, but that was the last information that I heard. Please treat that with a pinch of salt. The model of the Chieftain is already in the game, but I don't know. We shall see. We shall see. But for now, it's the Super Conqueror replacing the FV. For those who are interested what the Super Conqueror is likely to look like. It's basically, well, a Conqueror with a buffed gun. I'm not going to get into this in huge amounts of detail. I do just want to confirm that this gun is better. It's the same gun that we currently have on the Tier 9 Conqueror, but a better version of that gun. I imagine, though I haven't actually double checked, I imagine the gun performance on the FV215B will still be better. So if you compare the FV and the Super Conqueror, the FV will have a superior gun, while the Super Conqueror has better armour and a slightly less awkward turret placement. That's what I'm expecting. Okay. Then we need to talk about British tank destroyers. Ha ha ha. So, turreted British tank destroyers, the Challenger, Charioteer, Conway, FV4005 line, is also receiving some changes. So, Challenger, Tier 7, is having a 32-pounder gun added to its roster. So no longer will you be reliant on the little pew pew 17-pounder. Now, this has some good bits and this has some bad bits. The new 32-pounder will have higher penetration and higher alpha damage, so 220 pen, 280 alpha. Great. However, the tank will receive a nerf to its rate of fire with that gun compared to the current gun, which means overall your DPM will come down. Basically, this gun is going to be more for those people who want to take a more passive role and snipe people from a greater distance, because you'll have greater pen and greater alpha damage. The accuracy is going to be nerfed, comparing that gun with the 17-pounder. So basically, you're trading higher pen and higher alpha damage for worse accuracy, worse aim time, and things like that. The dispersion on shot on your gun after firing a shot is getting better apparently, so that will be nice. The turret traverse is increasing a little bit, which will also be nice. But as they're doing with a lot of these tanks, when going at full speed, the dispersion on the gun will be radically increased. But honestly, if you're firing on the move at full speed in these things, you don't expect to hit anything anyway. So, meh. That's the Tier 7. The Tier 8, the Charioteer, as far as I can work out, the gun depression is being buffed with all the guns, but most interestingly, with the top 105mm gun, the gun depression is going to go from 5 degrees, which is what it has at the moment, to 10 degrees, which is going to make that tank a much more comfortable machine to play. And whilst I don't necessarily think the Charioteer was desperate for changes, with the introduction of tanks like, picking a random non-specific example, the Scorpion, that's the German Scorpion, you did kind of wonder what the point of the Charioteer was anymore. Now, if it gets that gun depression buff, it will have a quality that is most definitely better than the Scorpion, so that will be nice. At Tier 9, we've got the FV4004 Conway. This is getting a speed buff, and it is having a new gun added to it. So at the moment, the Conway has a 120mm gun. As far as I'm aware, it's not going to lose that gun, or at least I've not heard anything saying it's going to lose that gun, but it's going to have a 5.5-inch gun added, which is a larger caliber gun, I believe. So, yeah, I think the gun is around 130, 140mm if you want that in new money. With this top gun, your penetration will go from 259 to 260, so basically the same. Your alpha damage will go from 400 to 600, so the gun will hit a lot harder. However, your rate of fire will be nerfed, and your DPM will be nerfed quite considerably. The shell velocity goes down, comparing the 120 to the new gun. The accuracy gets worse, the aim time gets worse, etc., etc. But the gun depression is also getting buffed. So you'll be packing something like 9 or 10 degrees of gun depression, which will be nice. So the Conway overall, I think, is going to become a much more usable tank. And if you like playing the Conway with the 120mm gun, as far as I'm aware, you will still be able to do that, but there'll be a new top gun for you to use if you find the 400 alpha a bit frustrating and you want something that hits a bit harder. 600 alpha at Tier 9, that's definitely rather harder. So all round, I think that's good news for the Conway, all things considered. Then we get to the FV4005 Stage 2, the Tier 10. So, this thing is receiving a whole heap of buffs. The maximum speed is going from 35 kilometers an hour to 50 going forward, and 12 to 15 in reverse. So this thing will shift much more than it does so at the minute. The turret dispersion will be drastically reduced, so your reticule will bloom less from turning the turret. The only bit that's going to be increased is when you're moving at full speed, but you now have a higher full speed, so that makes sense. The dispersion, again, that's the dispersions moving at full speed will be increased. Woohoo! The turret reverse speed is going to go up from 12.5 degrees a second to 16.7 degrees a second. The gun depression is going from 5 to 10 degrees, which is very nice. And the horizontal gun traverse is going from 90 degrees to 180. So much like the T110E4, this gun will be able to go round to the sides of the tank. You still won't be able to point the gun behind you. It's not a fully rotating turret, but it will go around to the sides. So that's a fairly significant buff for the FV4005 Stage 2, which is good because God knows that tank needed it. It was generally considered to be a turd on tracks. So that is what's happening to the higher tier British turreted tank destroyers. One more thing to mention. So all of this is apparently coming, apart from the French tank, let's ignore the French tank, all of those British tank changes that I've mentioned are due to be coming in the next patch. Now let's talk about something that's probably not coming in the next patch, is a rumour, but is kind of maybe on the cards. If we look at the other British tank destroyer line, from tiers 5 to 9, they all have a pretty consistent playstyle. You have pew-pew guns, a big, fat, slow tank with thick armour but a noticeable weak point. The playstyle, you know, and that's pretty consistent. You suddenly get to tier 10 and the tank radically changes to being a massively powerful, in one shot anyway, dirtmobile. Again, remember, Wargaming want a more consistent playstyle, so there is a rumour that the FV215B183, the mighty Death Star, is going to be replaced with the Conqueror casement test rig. Now, there aren't really any stats for that, there are just some pictures, which you can see here, and some kind of, I guess, design sketches. So you can see here, for instance. What it basically looks like is a tortoise on steroids. This is my first impression. So I'm not sure if you're going to stay with the 120mm gun that the tortoise has, or whether they're going to give you a bigger gun. But I imagine you're probably going to have a slow tank with good gun depression, a relatively small caliber gun by the standards of tier 10 tank destroyers, with relatively high DPM, and good accuracy, and relatively strong frontal armour. If we look at these designs, for instance, there's no dirty great machine gun port sticking out the top or something like that that would be a really, really obvious weak point. Now that doesn't mean that the front of this armour won't have weak points, I'm just saying possibly not that dirty great big thing sticking out the top, which will be nice. Now, if this does happen, it begs the question on what would happen to the Death Star, to the FV215B. Now, the FV215B 183, unlike the British Tier 10 heavy tank, the FV215B isn't a complete work of fiction. The actual design for the FV215B was that it would use a 183mm naval gun. That is the tank we have in the game. Now, I don't know for sure that this change is even going to come about. This is speculation. I certainly don't know if it did come about exactly what would happen to the existing Tier 10 British quote-unquote non-turreted tank destroyer. What Wargaming have done with a lot of those machines, of course, or what Wargaming are currently doing, what they did with the Foch, what they're doing with the FV215B, 120 that is they're making them special reward tanks at Tier 10, and they are, as they replace them. But I think with this one they could go in a different direction. If it were left to me, I think what I would do is replace the FV with the new CTR, whatever the hell it's called, Conqueror casement test rig. And then I would probably take the Death Star, move it over to the British turreted tank destroyer line, and have the Tortoise lead to 2 tier 10s. You would then have the FV 4005 and the FV 215B183. You would then have 2 semi-turreted tier 10 tank destroyers leading from 1 turreted tier 9 tank destroyer. The 183 would have more armor. The FV 4005 Stage 2 would have greater mobility and flexibility. I think that could be an option. It might also allow you to have a cross-link line going, say, from the British heavy tank line to the FV 215B183 or something like that as an alternative route to get there that doesn't involve the god-awful Conqueror gun carriage, because that thing is a steaming great turd and there is no reason to play it at the moment. That's what I'd do. Is that what Wargaming is going to do? I honestly don't know. Not sure. You know, I don't even know if this thing's actually going to happen. It's very much a rumour, but I thought I would mention it. What I'm going to do, though, is assume that the FV215B183 will be replaced with the Conqueror casement test rig and turned into a special reward tank. And I'm going to assume that because that means that I'm going to continue my long paused grind up the British tank destroyer lines. That way, if it turns out that Wargaming are doing this, I should be ready to purchase the 183 and get a shiny new additional tier 10 out of it. And if it turns out that Wargaming aren't doing this, well, all I've done is ground up some lines I was going to grind up anyway. I've just condensed it a bit. And, I mean, having played those tanks, a lot of those tanks, unlike the Foch grind, it's not going to be the sort of grind that kills me and makes me want to, I don't know, strangle kittens or something. So, yeah, that is my plan. What you choose to do is entirely up to you. I would like to point out that, as ever, and honestly, until it's released on the live server, nothing is set in stone, and even if it is released on the live server, Wargaming, of course, can change it. So I don't want anyone to come to me complaining that something I've said doesn't happen, or something I haven't said does happen, or anything like that. Just some information for you guys to come to your own conclusions about. Okay? Anyway, there we go. That's all I wanted to say. I hope the information is at the very least vaguely interesting to some of you, possibly even useful to some of you. If that's the case, awesome. If not, well, hopefully you worked that out 5 minutes into the video and you didn't waste your time watching and listening to the rest of it. Either way, I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield, and I will catch you in another video. Ciao, ciao.